My name is Abigail, and I'm 28 years old. The shrill ring of my phone at 2:03 in the morning changed everything I believed about family. My mother's hysterical voice screamed through the speaker, demanding $15,000 for my brother Aaron's emergency. "Don't call the police or he dies," she warned. I was already logging into my bank account when another call interrupted. This time it was the police. "Ma'am, your brother Aaron died 3 days ago in a car accident." My blood ran cold. Before we dive into this shocking betrayal, where are you watching from today? Please hit that like button and subscribe if you want to hear how deep family deception can go. This story will make you question everything you think you know about the people closest to you. Get comfortable, because what happened next will leave you speechless. That Tuesday evening had started like any other. I was working late at my desk, reviewing financial portfolios for my clients at the investment firm where I'd built my career. The Austin skyline glittered through my office window as I sipped my third cup of coffee, completely unaware that my entire world was about to shatter. When my phone lit up at 2:03 a.m. showing Mom on the caller ID, my heart immediately started racing. Middle of the night calls never bring good news. My mother Ada's voice was unlike anything I'd ever heard from her before. She was sobbing so hard I could barely understand her words. "Abigail, honey, you need to listen very carefully. They have Aaron. They took him, and they want $15,000 or they'll kill him." Her words hit me like physical blows. My younger brother Aaron, just 25 years old, was supposedly being held for ransom. My father Abraham's voice suddenly boomed in the background before he grabbed the phone from her. "Stop wasting time with tears," he barked at my mother before addressing me. "Abigail, we need that money within 2 hours. These people aren't playing games. They've already hurt him once." I could hear what sounded like muffled screaming in the background, and my stomach churned. Dad's voice was harder than I'd ever heard it, stripped of any warmth or fatherly concern, just cold demand. The specific details they provided were strangely precise. They knew I had exactly $16,400 in my savings account, down to the cent. They instructed me to withdraw $15,000 in cash, leave the rest for fees, and bring it to a specific address they'd text me. No police, no questions, just compliance. The fact that they knew my exact balance should have been my first red flag, but panic clouded my judgment. I immediately sprang into action, my hands shaking as I opened my banking app. The withdrawal limit was $3,000 at ATMs, so I'd need to visit multiple machines or wait for the bank to open. Neither option would meet their tower deadline. I called the emergency banking line, trying to arrange a special withdrawal while my parents stayed on the phone, their demands growing more aggressive with each passing minute. "Why are you taking so long?" my mother wailed. "Do you want your brother to die? Is your money more important than his life?" Her accusations stung, but something in her tone felt rehearsed, like she was reading from a script. My father grabbed the phone again. "Stop being selfish, Abigail. We've already mortgaged our house trying to save him. You're our only hope." That detail made me pause. Mortgage their house? They'd never mentioned financial troubles before. In fact, just last month they'd been bragging about their upcoming cruise vacation. I tried asking for more details about the supposed kidnappers, but my questions only enraged them further. "There's no time for your interrogation," my father snarled. "Either you help your brother, or you live with his blood on your hands." I was inputting the wire transfer information when my phone buzzed with another incoming call. The caller ID showed our local police department. My parents must have heard the buzz because they immediately started screaming. "Don't you dare answer that. They'll kill him if police get involved." But something made me put them on hold and take the call that would reveal their monstrous deception. Detective Allen's professional voice was calm, but carried an undertone of urgency. "Miss Thompson, this is Detective Allen with Austin PD. I'm sorry to call at this hour, but we've been trying to reach your parents about your brother Aaron. We need someone to come identify." He paused, clearly choosing his words carefully. "Ma'am, there was a fatal car accident 3 days ago. We believe the victim is Aaron Thompson." The world tilted on its axis. 3 days ago? But my parents were just saying he was kidnapped tonight. My voice came out as barely a whisper. "That's impossible. My parents are on the other line right now saying Aaron's been kidnapped. They're demanding ransom money. The silence on the detective's end stretched for several seconds before he responded. Ma'am, I personally notified your parents 3 days ago. They identified the body yesterday morning. Are you saying they're claiming he's been kidnapped right now? My hands went numb, the phone nearly slipping from my grip. The muffled screaming I'd heard in the background of my parents' call suddenly took on a sinister new meaning. If Aaron was already dead, who was screaming? And why were my parents trying to extort money from me using my dead brother as bait? The detective's next words confirmed my worst fears. Miss Thompson, where are you right now? I think you need to come to the station immediately. And whatever you do, don't send any money to anyone. I switched back to my parents' call, my voice steady despite the rage building inside me. I spoke carefully, not wanting to let them know I was onto their scheme yet. I'm having trouble with the transfer. The bank is flagging it as suspicious. Can I bring cash in the morning instead? My mother's response was immediate and venomous. Morning? He'll be dead by morning. What kind of sister are you? But I'd heard enough. The parents who had raised me, who I'd trusted implicitly my entire life, were trying to scam me using my brother's death. My actual dead brother. The betrayal was so profound that I felt physically ill. I ended the call with a vague promise to figure something out and immediately started getting dressed to meet Detective Allen at the police station. As I drove through the empty Austin streets at 3 in the morning, my phone exploded with texts from my parents. Increasingly desperate messages about Aaron's worsening condition, about the kidnappers growing impatient, about how they'd never forgive me if I let him die. Each text was another twist of the knife they'd already plunged into my back. But the worst part was yet to come, because this was only the beginning of discovering how deep their deception really ran. The sun was just beginning to paint the Texas sky in shades of orange and pink when I finally left the police station. Detective Allen had been thorough but gentle as he showed me the accident report, the coroner's preliminary findings, and the visitor log showing my parents had indeed identified Aaron's body the day before. My baby brother was gone, killed instantly when a drunk driver ran a red light, and my parents had seen his broken body with their own eyes before calling me with their elaborate kidnapping story. I sat in my car for 15 minutes, trying to process the dual loss of my brother and my trust in my parents. The detective had advised me to go home and rest, to let them handle the investigation into what he called a deeply disturbing case of fraud. But I couldn't rest. I needed to look my parents in the eye and understand how they could do something so unconscionably cruel. Against the detective's advice, I drove straight to their house in the suburbs. The familiar sight of my childhood home, with its white picket fence and my mother's prized rose garden, now felt like a facade hiding something rotten. Their cars were both in the driveway, and, through the kitchen window, I could see them moving around as if this was just another normal morning. As if they hadn't just tried to extort money from me using my dead brother's name. As if they hadn't shattered every bond of trust that exists between parent and child. I didn't knock. I still had my key from when I'd house sat last year, and I wanted to catch them off guard. The smell of bacon and coffee hit me as I entered, such a normal domestic scene that it made the situation even more surreal. They were sitting at the kitchen table, my father reading his tablet while my mother buttered toast, both dressed in their robes as if they'd had a peaceful night's sleep. The way their faces transformed when they saw me would have been comedic if it wasn't so horrifying. My mother's coffee mug slipped from her hand, shattering on the tile floor and sending hot coffee splashing across her slippers. My father's tablet clattered to the table as he jumped up, his face cycling through surprise, fear, and then settling on an attempt at righteous indignation. Abigail, what are you doing here? Where's the money for Aaron? The audacity of him still trying to maintain the lie when I was standing right there made my vision blur with rage. I know Aaron's dead, I said, my voice deadly quiet. I know you identified his body yesterday. I know there are no kidnappers. So what I want to know is why my parents would try to steal $15,000 from me using my dead brother as leverage. My mother's transformation was instantaneous. The tears that had seemed so real on the phone dried up, and her face hardened into something I'd never seen before. She stood slowly, glass crunching under her slippers, and pointed at me with a shaking finger. "Don't you dare come into our house and accuse us of anything. We're grieving parents. We lost our son." The performance might have been convincing if I hadn't just heard her use that same theatrical wail hours earlier while claiming Aaron was being tortured. When I pulled out my phone to show them the police report, my father moved faster than I'd seen him move in years. He lunged across the kitchen, trying to grab the phone from my hands. His fingers caught my wrist in a painful grip, and for the first time in my life, I felt physically threatened by the man who was supposed to protect me. "Give me that phone," he growled, his breath hot on my face. "You don't understand what you're getting involved in." I wrenched away from him, backing toward the door, but my mother moved to block my path. The woman who had sung me lullabies and kissed my scraped knees was now standing between me and escape, her face twisted into something unrecognizable. "We needed that money," she hissed. "You have no idea what we've been dealing with. Those cruise photos on Facebook? All fake. We haven't been able to afford anything for months." That's when the truth started spilling out, ugly and raw. My father's voice took on a desperate edge as he explained their massive gambling debts, how they'd started small with lottery tickets and graduated to casino weekends that spiraled out of control. They owed $47,000 to various creditors, including some very dangerous people who didn't accept payment plans. They'd already borrowed against their house, emptied their retirement accounts, and sold everything valuable they could without us kids noticing. My mother picked up the narrative, her voice switching between self-pity and accusation. "We knew you had money saved. You always were the responsible one, sitting on your wealth while we struggled. We just needed a little help, and you would have said no if we'd asked directly. So when Aaron died, we saw an opportunity. It's what he would have wanted, helping his parents one last time." The casualness with which she spoke about exploiting Aaron's death made bile rise in my throat. I managed to ask them how they'd already scammed other relatives, remembering the detective mentioning something about other victims. My father's face darkened further. "That was supposed to be private. Who else have you been talking to? What did you tell the police?" Their admission came in pieces. Uncle Albert had given them $8,000 for Aaron's supposed medical bills before the accident. Cousin Alexa had contributed $5,000 for funeral expenses that they'd never intended to use for a funeral. 3 other relatives had sent smaller amounts, all based on different stories about Aaron's condition and needs. They'd been planning to milk his death for weeks, maybe months, creating elaborate scenarios to extract money from anyone who loved him. But the most chilling revelation was yet to come. I noticed a folder on the kitchen counter labeled with my name. When I grabbed it before they could stop me, I found printed screenshots of my bank statements, investment accounts, even my credit report. They'd been monitoring my finances for months, possibly years. Post-it notes in my mother's handwriting detailed my spending patterns, when I got paid, when I typically had the most money available. "You've been stalking my finances?" I asked, my voice breaking. The parents I'd trusted with my social security number, who had helped me open my first bank account, had been using that trust to spy on me. My mother's response was chillingly matter-of-fact. "We're your parents. We have a right to know about your life. Besides, you'd never miss $15,000. You make that in what, 2 months?" The folder contained more than just financial surveillance. There were photos of my apartment building, notes about my daily routine, even details about my company's life insurance policy that I'd forgotten I'd mentioned during a family dinner. The realization that they'd been viewing me not as their daughter, but as a potential mark made my skin crawl. Every family gathering, every casual conversation about work or savings had been intelligence gathering for them. My father must have sensed I was about to leave and call the police because he suddenly switched tactics. His voice became pleading, the angry man replaced by someone I almost recognized as my dad. "Abby, sweetheart, we made a mistake. We're just desperate. These people, the ones we owe money to, they've threatened us. They know where we live, where you work. If we don't pay them soon, they might come after you too. We were trying to protect you." It was manipulation at its finest, trying to make their crime seem like concern for my safety. But I'd heard enough. I clutched the folder of evidence and backed toward the door. "I'm going to the police with this," I told them. What you've done is fraud, it's crime, and it's unforgivable. You used Aaron's death to try to steal from your own daughter. What kind of parents do that? My mother's mask finally slipped completely. Her voice became venomous as she spat out years of resentment I'd never known existed. The kind of parents who sacrificed everything for ungrateful children who hoarded their success instead of sharing it with family. You think you're so much better than us with your fancy job and downtown apartment. Well, we'll see how superior you feel when everyone knows what kind of daughter lets her parents suffer while she lives in luxury. The threat was clear that they'd try to turn this around on me somehow, make me the villain in their twisted narrative. My father added his own warning. You go to the police, and we'll make sure everyone knows you refused to help save Aaron. That you knew he was in danger and chose money over your brother's life. We have friends who will back up our story. You'll be the sister who let her brother die. Their willingness to further desecrate Aaron's memory for their own gain was the final straw. I recorded their threats on my phone, adding to the evidence I'd already gathered. As I finally made it to the door, my mother called out one last manipulation. When those creditors come for you, don't say we didn't try to protect you. Family is supposed to stick together, but you've chosen to destroy us instead. I left that house knowing I'd never return as a daughter seeking comfort or belonging. The home where I'd grown up had become a crime scene, and the parents I'd loved were the perpetrators. As I drove back to the police station with the folder of evidence, I called Aunt Adelaide, my mother's sister who'd always been the voice of reason in our family. Her reaction to my story would reveal just how deep this web of deception went and whether I had any family left to trust at all. The investigation was just beginning, but already I could see that my parents' betrayal wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment. It was a calculated campaign of manipulation that had been months or years in the making. And if they'd been willing to use Aaron's death against me, what else had they done that I didn't know about yet? Detective Allen's expression grew increasingly grim as he reviewed the evidence I'd brought from my parents' house. The financial surveillance, the photos of my apartment, the detailed notes about my routines, all painted a picture of premeditation that went far beyond a desperate grab for money. He immediately called in a financial crimes specialist and suggested I contact a lawyer, warning that this case was likely to expand significantly once they started digging. While I waited at the station, my phone rang with a call from Aunt Adelaide. Her voice was shaky, and I could tell she'd been crying. Abigail, honey, I just got off the phone with your mother. She's spinning quite a tale about you refusing to help with Aaron's memorial expenses. But something doesn't add up. Albert already gave them money for that last week. What's really going on? When I explained the real situation, Adelaide's sharp intake of breath told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't the first time my parents had done something like this. Her next words confirmed my worst fears. Oh, Abigail. I was hoping this day would never come, that they'd changed. But you need to know some things about your parents' history. Can you meet me at my house? And bring that detective with you. I have documents you need to see. Detective Allen agreed to accompany me, sensing that Adelaide's information could be crucial to the investigation. As we drove across Austin to her neat suburban home, I tried to prepare myself for whatever revelations were coming. But nothing could have prepared me for the scope of what Adelaide revealed when she led us to her home office and opened an old filing cabinet. She pulled out folder after folder, each labeled with dates going back 20 years. I've been keeping records, she explained, her hands trembling slightly. After what they did to Adrian, I started documenting everything, just in case. Your Uncle Adrian, her voice caught. He didn't die of a heart attack like they told everyone. He died in a car accident, and your parents convinced his widow to let them handle the insurance claims. They kept 70% of the settlement, claiming it was for legal fees that never existed. The detective began photographing documents as Adelaide continued her horrifying revelations. My parents had systematically exploited every family tragedy for financial gain. When my grandmother developed dementia, they became her caregivers and slowly drained her accounts, using her confusion to get her to sign over property deeds and investment accounts. They'd sold her house for far below market value to a friend who kicked back half the difference to them in cash. But the pattern went even deeper. Adelaide showed us copies of emails and text messages from various family members over the years, all describing similar scenarios. Cousin Adrian stepped forward during our meeting, having driven over after Adelaide called her. Her story was particularly chilling. When she'd been diagnosed with cancer 5 years ago, my parents had organized fundraisers in her name, collecting over $30,000 from church members, coworkers, and extended family. Adrian had only seen $3,000 of it. They told me the rest went to administrative costs, Adrian explained, her voice bitter. I was too sick to fight them, and I trusted family. It wasn't until I recovered and started asking questions that I realized they'd kept most of the money. When I confronted them, they threatened to tell everyone I was an ungrateful fraud who'd exaggerated my illness for attention. They had photos of me on a good day, walking in the park, that they said they'd use to prove I was never really that sick. The detective was furiously taking notes as more family members began arriving at Adelaide's house, word having spread that finally someone was doing something about my parents' crimes. Each person brought evidence of another scheme, another betrayal, another exploitation of trust and tragedy. The dollar amount of their thefts climbed into the hundreds of thousands as we tallied up the various frauds over 2 decades. Uncle Alex arrived with perhaps the most damning evidence. He discovered that my parents had been running a secret business filing false insurance claims, using their legitimate insurance agency jobs to access information and create fraudulent policies. They'd even taken out life insurance policies on various family members without their knowledge, listing themselves as beneficiaries. He produced a stack of documents showing policies on me, my siblings, cousins, even elderly relatives in nursing homes. Your policy is particularly interesting, Alex told me, pointing to a document dated just 3 months ago. They increased the value to $750,000 and have been paying the premiums religiously. Given what happened with Aaron and now this fake kidnapping scheme, I'd be very careful if I were you. They're in deep with some dangerous people, and you're worth more dead than alive to them. The revelation that my parents might have been planning something even worse than fraud sent chills down my spine. Detective Allen immediately called for additional resources, and within an hour, what had started as a simple fraud investigation had escalated to a major financial crimes task force operation. Federal agents arrived to review the insurance fraud angles, while local police began coordinating with authorities in other counties where my parents had operated. As the investigation expanded, we learned about my parents' connections to a network of casino operators and illegal bookmakers. They weren't just gambling addicts, they were actively involved in money laundering operations, using their insurance agency positions to clean dirty money through fake claims and policies. The dangerous people they'd claimed were threatening them were actually business partners who were angry about missing money from their shared schemes. My phone rang constantly as word spread through the family network. Each call brought new information, new evidence, new stories of betrayal. But the most painful call came from my brother Alan, who'd been estranged from the family for 3 years. His voice was heavy with exhaustion as he explained why he'd cut contact. I discovered what they were doing back in college, he said. They tried to force me to take out student loans I didn't need so they could pocket the money. When I refused, they forged my signature anyway. I've been fighting identity theft issues ever since. They destroyed my credit before I even graduated. I wanted to warn you and Aaron, but they threatened to have me arrested for the forged loans if I said anything. They had emails they'd sent from my account that made it look like I was complicit. The web of blackmail and coercion my parents had woven was staggering. They'd trapped multiple family members in cycles of silence, using their own crimes against them as leverage. Alan's attempt to protect his siblings had been met with threats so severe he'd had to completely cut ties for his own safety. Now, with Aaron dead and me in danger, he decided to finally come forward regardless of the consequences. Detective Allen coordinated with the FBI to place Alan in protective custody as a key witness, recognizing that his testimony could be crucial in building a RICO case against my parents and their associates. The investigation had grown far beyond simple fraud into organized crime territory, with my parents at the center of a web of corruption that stretched across state lines and involved dozens of victims. By evening, Adelaide's house had become an impromptu command center for family members sharing information with law enforcement. The dining room table was covered with documents, laptops, and evidence bags. My aunt had ordered pizza for everyone, creating a surreal atmosphere where we were simultaneously grieving Aaron, processing decades of betrayal, and building criminal cases against the people who were supposed to protect us. As I watched my cousins, aunts, and uncles work together to expose my parents' crimes, I realized something profound. My parents had tried to destroy the bonds of family for their own gain, but instead, they'd created a stronger unit united against them. The family members they'd hurt, blackmailed, and stolen from were now standing together, refusing to be silenced any longer. But even as we found strength in numbers, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were only seeing the tip of the iceberg. My parents had been at this for 20 years, and they'd gotten very good at it. What else would we discover as the investigation continued? And more importantly, how far were they willing to go to protect their secrets and save themselves? The answer to that question would come sooner than expected, and it would prove that my parents' capacity for betrayal had no limits. As the task force prepared to execute search warrants the next morning, none of us knew that my parents were already planning their most desperate move yet. My phone buzzed at 6 a.m. with an unknown number. I almost ignored it, exhausted from barely sleeping after the previous day's revelations, but something made me answer. The voice on the other end was one I hadn't heard in 5 years, my sister Aileen, who had disappeared from our lives without explanation, leaving only a brief note saying she needed to start over somewhere else. "Abigail, I heard about Aaron," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "And I know what Mom and Dad are trying to do to you. I've been watching from a distance, waiting for this day. I'm in Dallas, but I'm driving down now. We need to talk before you trust anyone else in this mess. There's so much you don't know, and some of the people helping you aren't who they seem." The warning sent fresh anxiety through my already frayed nerves. Who specifically shouldn't I trust? I asked, but Aileen was cryptic. "Not over the phone. They have ways of listening. Meet me at that coffee shop on 6th Street where we used to study in college. 2 p.m. Come alone and watch for anyone following you. And Abigail? Don't tell Adelaide or Albert I'm coming. Especially not Albert." Her specific warning about our family lawyer uncle made my blood run cold. Albert had seemed so helpful yesterday, offering to protect my assets and mediate with my parents. Had I walked into another trap? I agreed to meet Aileen, my mind racing with possibilities of what she might reveal. I spent the morning at the police station, working with Detective Allen to review the evidence we'd gathered. He mentioned that they'd tried to execute the search warrants at my parents' house, but they'd fled during the night. Their cars were gone, closets emptied of clothes, and their computers were missing. They'd clearly been tipped off about the investigation, which meant someone in our trusted circle was feeding them information. The betrayal of having a mole among the family members who'd gathered to help was almost too much to process. Detective Allen noticed my distress and suggested I take a break. I used the opportunity to head to the coffee shop early, paranoid about being followed and wanting to secure a corner table where I could see anyone approaching. Aileen arrived exactly at 2 p.m., and the 5 years had changed her dramatically. Gone was the bubbly college student I remembered. In her place was a serious woman with sharp eyes that constantly scanned the room for threats. She hugged me tightly, both of us crying for Aaron and for the years we'd lost, before she pulled back and got straight to business. "I left because they tried to force me into a marriage fraud scheme," she began, her voice low but urgent. "They found some guy who needed a green card and was willing to pay $50,000 for a fake marriage. When I refused, they drugged me at a family dinner and tried to force me to sign the marriage certificate. I woke up at the courthouse with Mom holding my hand to the pen. I fought them off and ran, but they'd already taken photos that made it look like I was willingly participating. The story was horrifying but fit perfectly with everything else I'd learned about our parents." Aileen continued, explaining how she'd spent the last 5 years building a new life under a slightly different name, always looking over her shoulder. She'd hired a private investigator to keep tabs on the family, which is how she knew about Aaron's death and my current situation. But here's what you need to know about Albert, she said, pulling out a tablet with files ready to display. He's not just helping Mom and Dad, he's been their partner from the beginning. That law degree of his? Paid for with money they stole from Grandma's estate. He's been providing legal cover for their schemes, creating shell companies, filing false documents, and threatening victims who try to come forward. Half the family thinks he's the helpful uncle, but he's the architect of most of their sophisticated frauds. The evidence she showed me was comprehensive. Albert's signature on fraudulent documents, emails discussing strategy with my parents, bank records showing regular payments from their illegal activities. He'd been playing the role of concerned family lawyer while actively enabling and profiting from every scheme. The man who'd offered to help me protect my assets was actually assessing what else could be stolen. Aileen had more revelations. Our brother Alan wasn't as innocent as he seemed either. While he had genuinely been victimized by our parents, he'd also participated in some of their schemes before trying to get out. They had evidence of his involvement that they'd been using to keep him quiet. His coming forward now was brave, but it was also calculated to get immunity before someone else exposed his role. The layers of deception within our family were staggering. Trust had become a liability, and everyone had secrets that could be weaponized. But Aileen had spent 5 years preparing for this moment, gathering evidence and building alliances with other victims outside our immediate family. She'd created a network of people our parents had scammed over the years, all waiting for the right moment to strike back. I've been in contact with former employees from their insurance agency, she explained. People who were fired for refusing to participate in fraud or who were scapegoated when schemes went wrong. There's a whole group ready to testify, but they've been too scared because Albert always threatened them with lawsuits or worse. With him exposed, they'll finally come forward. She introduced me via video call to several of these witnesses, each with stories that added new dimensions to my parents' criminal enterprise. They'd been running their fraud operations like a mafia family, with Alfred as their consigliere and a network of corrupted professionals including accountants, notaries, and even a judge who owed them gambling debts. But the most shocking revelation was about Aaron. Eileen's private investigator had been tracking him too, and she showed me reports from the weeks before his death. He'd been gathering evidence just like we were, planning to expose our parents and testify against them. The car accident that killed him was suspicious, a single vehicle crash on a clear night with no obvious cause. The brake lines had been too damaged in the crash to determine if they'd been tampered with. You think they killed him? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Eileen's face was grim. I can't prove it, but the timing is too convenient. Aaron had contacted a federal prosecutor the day before he died. He was going to turn state's evidence in exchange for protection. Then suddenly he's dead, and Mom and Dad immediately start using his death for fraud schemes like they'd been planning it. The possibility that my parents were not just thieves, but murderers changed everything. If they'd killed Aaron to silence him, then I was in more danger than I'd realized. Aileen had the same thought. I've been staying at a safe house outside the city, she said. You should come with me. They know the police are after them now, which makes them desperate. Desperate people do desperate things. I agreed to pack essentials and meet her later, but first I needed to warn Detective Allen about Albert and the possible murder angle to Aaron's death. Aileen gave me encrypted files to share with the detective, years of accumulated evidence that would blow the case wide open. As we prepared to leave the coffee shop, she grabbed my hand with an intensity that reminded me of when we were kids and she'd protect me from bullies. We're going to get justice for Aaron, she promised. And we're going to make sure they never hurt anyone again. But Abby, you need to prepare yourself. This is going to get uglier before it gets better. They've had 20 years to build their empire, and they have allies we don't even know about yet. Some of them might be people you trust. Her warning proved prophetic almost immediately. As we exited the coffee shop, I spotted a familiar car across the street with someone taking photos of us. It was Alaska, Aaron's best friend who was supposed to provide evidence to help our case. But she was clearly surveilling us, and when she saw that we'd noticed her, She quickly drove away. Another betrayal, another person who wasn't what they seemed. Aileen and I split up with a plan to meet at her safe house after I'd gathered my things and updated Detective Allen. As I drove away, constantly checking my mirrors for anyone following, I realized that my sister's return hadn't just brought new evidence and allies. It had revealed that we were fighting a hydra, where cutting off one head only revealed two more, and where anyone could be an enemy hiding behind a friendly face. The skills my parents had used to build their criminal enterprise, including manipulation, deception, and exploiting trust, had infected our entire extended network. Sorting out who was a victim, who was a willing participant, and who was playing both sides would be like navigating a minefield. But with Eileen's help and her network of outside allies, we finally had a chance to expose the full truth and get justice for everyone they'd hurt, especially Aaron. As I called Detective Allen to arrange an urgent meeting, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were running out of time. My parents were out there somewhere, desperate and dangerous, with allies we hadn't identified and resources we didn't know about. The fake kidnapping call had been their opening move in what was becoming a deadly chess game, and I was only just beginning to understand the rules. Detective Allen's face was grave as he reviewed the evidence Aileen had provided about Albert and Aaron's suspicious death. He immediately dispatched units to arrest Albert, but like my parents, the lawyer had vanished. His office was cleared out, his house empty, and his bank accounts drained. The entire crime family was on the run, but as I would soon learn, running didn't mean they were done with me. The first sign of escalation came that evening as I packed essentials at my apartment. My neighbor knocked frantically on my door, saying she'd seen someone trying to jimmy my lock 30 minutes earlier. Security footage showed a man in a baseball cap who moved with professional precision, testing my door before being scared off by other residents. The building's management confirmed he'd been asking questions about me at the front desk, claiming to be a delivery driver. Detective Allen assigned a patrol car to watch my building, but I knew I couldn't stay there. As I loaded my car in the parking garage, preparing to drive to Eileen's safe house, footsteps echoed behind me. I spun around to find a large man approaching rapidly, his hand reaching inside his jacket. Pure instinct made me dive between cars as he lunged for where I'd been standing. My scream echoed off the concrete walls as I scrambled away, car keys clutched as a makeshift weapon. The patrol officers responded to my panicked calls, but the man had vanished into the stairwell. Security footage revealed he'd been waiting in the garage for 2 hours, clearly knowing my routine. This wasn't random. It was a calculated attempt to grab me. Detective Allen reviewed the footage and recognized the man as a known associate of the casino operators my parents owed money to. The fake kidnapping story was becoming real, just with me as the target instead of Aaron. Within hours, my life became unrecognizable. I couldn't go home, couldn't go to work, couldn't follow any normal routine. Aileen picked me up in a rental car, taking multiple detours to ensure we weren't followed. Her safe house turned out to be a cabin 40 miles outside Austin, equipped with security cameras, motion sensors, and supplies for an extended stay. She'd been preparing for this possibility for years. As we settled in for the night, Aileen showed me more disturbing information her investigator had gathered. Our parents weren't just spreading lies to extended family. They were conducting a systematic campaign to destroy my credibility. They'd created fake social media profiles in my name, posting erratic messages about mental health struggles and family persecution. They'd sent emails to my employer claiming I was having a breakdown and needed psychiatric intervention. The sophistication of their character assassination was chilling. They'd photoshopped images of me at places I'd never been, created fake text conversations suggesting I was unstable, even produced a fraudulent psychiatric evaluation claiming I suffered from paranoid delusions. Every piece of evidence I'd gathered against them was being reframed as the obsessive fantasies of a disturbed daughter who'd snapped after her brother's death. My phone rang with a call from my boss, his voice concerned but distant. "Abigail, we've received some troubling communications about your mental state. Your parents sent us documentation suggesting you're experiencing a psychiatric crisis." They've requested that we place you on administrative leave for your own safety. I fought back tears as I tried to explain the real situation, but I could hear the doubt in his voice. The documents looked official, the emails seemed genuine, and my recent absence from work only reinforced their narrative. Cousin Aiden, who'd initially supported us, called next with disturbing news. My parents had reached out to him with their version of events, complete with fabricated evidence that I'd been embezzling from my company to fund a drug addiction. They claimed my accusations against them were projections of my own crimes, that I'd stolen money from Aaron before his death and was now trying to cover my tracks. The web of lies was so intricate that even family members who'd been victimized by them were starting to question what was real. But my parents' masterstroke came the next morning. Eileen's security system alerted us to vehicles approaching the cabin. We watched on monitors as 2 police cars pulled up, officers emerging with hands on their weapons. My heart sank as I realized what was happening. They'd somehow discovered our location and called in a false report. As the officers demanded we exit with our hands visible, I heard one radio back about responding to a possible hostage situation with a mentally unstable subject. The next hour was terrifying as we slowly convinced the officers to verify our identities and check with Detective Allen. My parents had called in a report claiming I'd kidnapped Aileen and was holding her at gunpoint, that I'd threatened to kill us both rather than face justice for murdering Aaron. They'd provided the cabin's exact address, which meant someone had followed us despite our precautions, or they had tracking capabilities we didn't know about. After the officers left, Detective Allen called with worse news. The FBI Financial Crimes Unit was now investigating me based on forged documents suggesting I'd been stealing client funds at my investment firm. The forgeries were excellent, using real client names and transactions, but altering key details to show money diverted to accounts that appeared to be mine. My parents had weaponized my career against me, using insider knowledge from all those family dinners where I'd proudly discussed my work. Aileen discovered how they'd found us when she checked her car for tracking devices. Hidden in the wheel well was a professional-grade GPS tracker that had been reporting our location in real time. But more disturbing was realizing when it had been planted. The only time her car had been unattended was at the coffee shop where we'd met, which meant someone had been watching us from the very beginning of our reunion. The noose was tightening from all directions. My reputation was being systematically destroyed, my freedom was under threat from false criminal accusations, and my safety was compromised by both criminal elements and law enforcement who'd been fed lies. My parents had evolved from con artists to psychological terrorists, using every tool at their disposal to break me before I could expose them. That night, as Aileen and I huddled in the cabin trying to figure out our next move, Alaska finally called. Aaron's best friend's voice was shaky as she confessed the truth. My parents had approached her after Aaron's death, claiming I'd been responsible for the accident somehow. They'd shown her fake text messages where I supposedly threatened Aaron, argued with him about money, even suggested I'd tampered with his car. They'd convinced her to spy on me, promising they just wanted to gather evidence for the police. But Alaska had realized something was wrong when she saw how terrified I looked leaving the coffee shop. She'd spent the day reviewing the fake evidence they'd given her and recognized signs of forgery. Now she wanted to help, but she was scared. They'd threatened that if she turned on them, they'd implicate her in Aaron's death too. They had photos of her at his apartment the night he died, taken out of context, but damaging enough to raise questions. The revelation that my parents were creating false murder suspects among Aaron's friends showed how far they'd go to protect themselves. They were building a roster of alternative theories for his death, each with enough fabricated evidence to create reasonable doubt if they were ever charged. Alaska agreed to meet with Detective Allen and provide the fake evidence they'd given her, adding another piece to the puzzle of their elaborate deceptions. As the second day in the safe house dawned, I realized we couldn't keep playing defense. Every moment we spent reacting to their attacks gave them more time to destroy evidence and create new lies. Aileen agreed, and we began planning a counteroffensive that would expose them publicly before they could completely annihilate my life. But even as we strategized, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were still missing something crucial about their plan. The answer would come from an unexpected source, and it would reveal that everything we'd discovered so far was just the beginning of their betrayal. My parents' final deception would prove to be their cruelest, involving someone I'd trusted implicitly and never thought to suspect. The real trap wasn't the one closing around me, it was the one that had been in place all along, waiting for the perfect moment to spring. The call from family lawyer Albert came at dawn on our third day in hiding. His voice was different from the smooth, professional tone I'd known all my life, now rough with exhaustion and what sounded like fear. "Abigail, I know you have no reason to trust me, but I need you to listen. I'm not who your parents said I was. I've been working undercover for the FBI for the past 18 months. We need to meet immediately. Your life depends on it." Every instinct screamed that this was another trap, but something in his voice made me hesitate. He continued before I could hang up. "I know about the tracker on Eileen's car because I'm the one who warned Detective Allen about it. I know about your parents' location because I've been feeding them false information to keep them contained. And I know about their final plan because I was supposed to help execute it. Please, Abigail. Your godmother Alba is in danger and she doesn't know it." The mention of Alba, my beloved godmother who'd been like a second mother to me, changed everything. She was one of the few family members who hadn't come forward with a story of being scammed, and I'd assumed it was because my parents hadn't targeted her yet. But if Albert was telling the truth, she was somehow central to their endgame. Against Eileen's protests, I agreed to meet Albert at the FBI field office, the only place I could be sure of safety. Detective Allen confirmed that Albert had indeed been cooperating with federal authorities, though he couldn't share details of the operation. As I sat across from the man I'd thought was a criminal mastermind, the truth that emerged was even more complex than I'd imagined. Albert explained that he'd been approached by the FBI after they'd noticed suspicious patterns in insurance claims he'd filed. Facing potential disbarment and prosecution, he'd agreed to wear a wire and gather evidence against my parents in exchange for leniency. For 18 months, he'd played the role of their accomplice while secretly recording every conversation and documenting every crime. The stress of the double life showed in his prematurely gray hair and the deep lines around his eyes. "Your parents trusted me with everything," he said, sliding a thick folder across the table, "including their plans for you and Alba. They've been setting this up for over a year, long before Aaron started investigating them. Alba isn't just another victim, Abigail. She's been helping them all along, and she's about to help them commit their biggest crime yet." The revelation hit like a physical blow. Alba, who'd held me when I cried over boys, who'd attended every graduation and celebration, who'd been my refuge when my parents were difficult. It couldn't be true. But Albert had recordings, emails, and financial documents that painted an undeniable picture. Alba had been funneling money for my parents, using her legitimate business to launder their illegal gains. Her flower shop was a front for cash transactions that cleaned dirty money from their various schemes. But it went deeper than money laundering. Alba had a gambling addiction that my parents had cultivated and exploited for years. They'd introduced her to high-stakes poker games, encouraged her losses, and then offered to help with loans that came with impossible interest. She owed them over $200,000, a debt they'd never intended to collect in cash. Instead, they'd been grooming her for one final service that would clear her debt and set them up for life. The plan was elegant in its cruelty. Alba would invite me to lunch at her shop, claiming she wanted to comfort me during this difficult time. My parents would be waiting in the back room, along with their associates from the casino. They planned to force me to sign documents transferring my assets, using threats against Alba to ensure my compliance. If I refused, Alba would die in what would look like a robbery gone wrong, and I'd be framed for hiring the killers out of greed for her inheritance. Albert showed me the preparation they'd done, including staged emails between me and a supposed hitman, doctored security footage placing me near criminals for hire, and a forged diary where Alba expressed fear of me. They'd created a complete alternate narrative where I was a murderous niece who'd killed Aaron for his inheritance and now wanted Alba's money too. The frame job was so thorough that even I felt a chill seeing how convincing it looked. But the worst part was Alba's willing participation. The recordings Albert had made showed her actively planning with my parents, discussing how to get me to the shop, what to say to make me comfortable, how to position me for the ambush. Her voice on the recordings was calm, methodical, discussing my probable murder with the same tone she used to describe flower arrangements. The godmother I'd loved was perfectly willing to sacrifice me to clear her debts. My phone rang as I processed this betrayal, Alba's name lighting up the screen. Her voice was warm and concerned, exactly as I remembered from happier times. "Abigail, sweetheart, I've been so worried about you. This whole situation with your parents is just terrible. Why don't you come by the shop? I'll make your favorite tea and we can talk. I have some photos of Erin I thought you might want." The performance was flawless. If I hadn't just heard recordings of her planning my kidnapping or death, I would have run straight into her arms. Instead, I let Albert coach me through a response that would buy us time. I told Alba I was out of town but would love to see her when I returned. Her disappointment seemed genuine, but now I could hear the calculation underneath. She promised to call again soon and reminded me how much she loved me. Detective Allen had been listening to our conversation and immediately began coordinating with the FBI task force. The revelation about Alba opened new investigative avenues, as her business records would provide a paper trail for years of money laundering. But more urgently, it meant my parents were likely in Austin, hiding somewhere near Alba's shop and waiting for their trap to spring. Albert provided one more crucial piece of information. "Your parents have been in contact with a contract killer named Demise. He's the one who was supposed to make Alba's death look like a robbery if necessary. But here's the thing, they've also discussed using him for another job. They think Aileen might have evidence that could destroy them, and they want her eliminated before she can share it with authorities." The threat against my sister sent me racing back to the safe house, Albert and a team of federal agents following. We found Aileen safe but shaken. She'd noticed someone surveilling the cabin from the woods and had prepared to flee. The net was closing around us from all sides, with my parents orchestrating moves like chess masters who'd thought 20 steps ahead. That night, as federal agents guarded the cabin and plans were made to arrest my parents and Alba, I struggled with the magnitude of betrayal I'd experienced. It wasn't just my parents who'd revealed themselves as monsters. It was the entire fabric of trust that held families together. Alba's betrayal hurt almost more than my parents because she'd been my chosen family, the proof that love didn't require blood. Now even that sanctuary was poisoned. Aileen held me as I cried, both of us mourning not just Erin but the family we'd thought we had. Every happy memory was now tainted with the knowledge of what had been happening behind the scenes. Every birthday Alba had celebrated with us, she'd been reporting back to my parents. Every time she'd offered comfort during family conflicts, she'd been gathering intelligence. The godmother who'd taught me to arrange flowers had been arranging my destruction all along. But even in the depths of this betrayal, I found a strange strength. My parents had stripped away every illusion, revealed every deception, and shown me the absolute worst of human nature. They'd taken everything they could: family, trust, security, reputation. But in doing so, they'd also freed me from the weight of false obligations. I no longer owed loyalty to blood relations who saw me only as a resource to exploit. I was free to build a new life with the family I chose, starting with Aileen and the others who'd stood by me. As dawn approached and the arrest teams prepared to move, I made a decision. I wouldn't just survive my parents' betrayal, I would ensure it could never happen again to anyone else. Their crime network would be dismantled completely, their victims would be made whole, and the story would be told as a warning to others. But first, we had to survive the next 24 hours, because my parents weren't going down without a fight. The text message that arrived as the sun rose confirmed our worst fears. It was from my father's phone, just 4 words that changed everything once again. "We have cousin Amy." The accompanying photo showed my 16-year-old cousin, terrified and tied to a chair. The final game had begun, and they'd just revealed they were willing to hurt a child to win. The photo of Amy sent shockwaves through our makeshift command center. My teenage cousin's terrified face stared back at us from my phone screen, her eyes pleading for help. Detective Allen immediately traced the phone's location while federal agents scrambled to verify if this was real or another elaborate deception. Within minutes, Amy's parents confirmed their worst fears that she'd disappeared from school during lunch period, last seen getting into a car with someone she seemed to know. My father's next message laid out their demands with chilling precision. Full immunity for all past actions. $500,000 in cash. Safe passage to Mexico. And all evidence against them destroyed. We had 6 hours to comply, or Amy would start losing fingers. The photo they sent as proof showed a garden pruning shear positioned next to Amy's bound hands. The tools from Alba's flower shop were unmistakable, confirming our worst suspicions about where they were holding her. Albert's knowledge of my parents' plans became crucial as he revealed the layout of Alba's shop and the hidden areas they'd prepared for their original scheme. Behind the refrigerated flower storage was a soundproofed room they'd used for high-stakes poker games, invisible to casual searches and perfect for holding a hostage. He sketched detailed floor plans while explaining the security measures they'd installed, including cameras that fed to my father's phone and motion sensors that would alert them to any approach. The FBI hostage negotiation team took control of the situation, but I could see the concern in their faces. My parents had chosen their location carefully. The flower shop sat in a busy commercial district where any police action would risk civilian casualties. They had a minor hostage whose safety was paramount. And they'd demonstrated a level of planning that suggested they'd prepared for exactly this scenario, probably with multiple escape routes and contingency plans. As negotiators established contact with my parents, their delusions became apparent. They genuinely believed they were the victims in this situation, that their children's betrayal had forced them to extreme measures. My mother's voice over the phone was filled with self-righteous anger as she ranted about ungrateful offspring who'd turned their backs on family. In her twisted narrative, kidnapping Amy was justified as protecting their survival against children who wanted to destroy them. But it was Alba's voice that chilled me most when she joined the call. The godmother who'd once sung me lullabies now spoke with cold calculation about how easy it would be to dispose of a body in the industrial acid they used for cleaning. She reminded the negotiators that she had nothing left to lose, that prison or death made no difference to someone whose life was already over. The woman I'd loved had been replaced by a desperate stranger capable of anything. The negotiations stretched through the afternoon as FBI agents positioned themselves around the flower shop. Thermal imaging confirmed 4 adults and 1 smaller figure inside, likely Amy and our 3 captors. But they also detected concerning heat signatures suggesting my parents had rigged incendiary devices throughout the building. Any forced entry could trigger a fire that would kill everyone inside, turning the flower shop into a crematorium. That's when Aileen proposed something that made everyone in the room object immediately. She wanted to trade herself for Amy, betting that our parents would see her as a more valuable hostage. She knew all their secrets, had evidence hidden in multiple locations, and could credibly promise to reveal it in exchange for Amy's safety. The FBI initially refused to consider it, but as the deadline approached with no progress, even they began to see it might be our only option. I fought against the plan desperately, unable to bear the thought of losing my sister after just finding her again. But Eileen's resolve was unshakable. "They've taken enough from our family," she said firmly. "I won't let them take Amy's innocence too. Besides, I know things about the shop that Albert doesn't. I spent time there during my college years, helping Alba with arrangements. I know every corner, every hiding spot, every weakness. If anyone can get Amy out safely, it's me." The exchange was set for 90 minutes before the deadline. Aileen would enter through the front door while Amy would be released through the back. Snipers took positions on surrounding buildings while assault teams waited in hidden staging areas. Every detail was planned meticulously, but everyone knew that once Aileen entered that building, anything could happen. I watched through binoculars from a command post 2 blocks away as my sister walked calmly toward the flower shop. She'd refused a wire or any tracking devices, knowing our parents would check for them. Her only protection was the knowledge that killing her immediately would cost them their leverage. As she reached the door, it opened to reveal Alba, whose face showed no emotion as she let Aileen inside. The longest 15 minutes of my life passed before the back door opened and Amy stumbled out, running toward the waiting FBI agents. Relief flooded through me as medics confirmed she was physically unharmed, though deeply traumatized. But the relief was short-lived as we realized my parents weren't honoring the rest of the agreement. They'd gotten what they wanted, a more valuable hostage, and now intended to use Aileen as their ticket to freedom. My father's voice came over the negotiator's phone, smug with perceived victory. Change of plans. We're keeping both daughters until we're safely across the border. Eileen's given us some interesting information about hidden evidence that needs to be retrieved. We'll release her when we're satisfied all threats have been neutralized. The sound of Aileen crying out in pain in the background suggested they were already using enhanced interrogation techniques. That's when Albert revealed his final card. During his months of pretending to be their accomplice, he'd installed fail-safes throughout the flower shop, including hidden cameras my parents didn't know about. He activated them now, giving us real-time video of the interior. What we saw made the situation even more critical. My parents had indeed rigged explosives, but worse, they'd forced Aileen to sit in a chair surrounded by accelerants. One spark would turn her into a human torch. The video also revealed something unexpected, that Alba was having second thoughts. As my parents focused on extracting information from Aileen, Alba stood apart, her hands shaking as she watched the torture of someone she'd helped raise. When my father struck Aileen across the face, Alba flinched. When my mother threatened to break Eileen's fingers, Alba quietly moved closer to the explosive's trigger mechanism. Detective Allen noticed it too. She's wavering, he murmured. The reality of torturing children she's known since birth might be breaking through her justifications. If we could reach the Alba who used to love these kids, we might have an inside ally. But how do you appeal to humanity in someone who's already crossed so many lines? The answer came from an unexpected source for me. I grabbed the negotiator's phone and spoke directly to the woman who'd been my second mother. Alba, it's Abigail. I know you're listening. I remember when you taught me to arrange roses for Mom's birthday when I was 7. You said every flower has its own beauty, but sometimes they get crushed before they can bloom. That's what's happening now. Aileen is being crushed. The little girl you used to braid flower crowns for is sitting in gasoline because of choices you made. But you can still choose differently. The silence on the line stretched endlessly before Alba's voice came through, barely a whisper. I can't undo what I've done, Abby. Your parents own my soul. But then her voice cut off as sounds of struggle erupted. The video feed showed my father had realized Alba was near the trigger and was fighting to stop her from something. In the chaos, we heard Alba scream one clear sentence. The side door locks from inside only. It was the break tactical teams needed. While my parents were distracted with Alba, assault units breached the side door she'd indicated. The next moments were a blur of smoke grenades, shouting, and controlled chaos as highly trained operators swept into the building. I held my breath, knowing that any mistake could trigger the explosives or harm Aileen. The radio crackled with updates. 2 suspects in custody. No, 3 suspects secured. The hostage was safe but injured. Explosives were being disarmed. Each update brought relief and terror in equal measure until finally, the all-clear came through. Aileen was alive, Alba was in custody, and my parents were finally captured. The nightmare that had begun with a 2 a.m. phone call was ending in a flower shop filled with tactical gear and tears. But even as ambulances arrived and suspects were led away in handcuffs, I knew the real work was just beginning. The crimes would need to be prosecuted, the victims made whole, and somehow, we'd need to find a way to heal from betrayals that had shattered every definition of family we'd known. The flower shop that had once symbolized beauty and growth had become a crime scene, but maybe from these ashes, something new could grow. The paramedics brought Aileen out on a stretcher, battered but alert. She managed a weak smile when she saw me, and I ran to her side. We made it, she whispered through split lips. They can't hurt anyone anymore. As I held her hand in the ambulance, I realized she was right. Our parents' reign of terror was over, but our journey to recovery was just beginning. The news of my parents' arrest spread through Austin like wildfire. Within hours, reporters surrounded the courthouse where they were being arraigned, their cameras capturing the surreal sight of the respectable insurance agents being led in handcuffs. The couple who'd attended PTA meetings and church fundraisers was now exposed as the center of a criminal enterprise that had stolen hundreds of thousands of dollars and destroyed dozens of lives. The federal prosecutor laid out charges that seemed to go on forever, including racketeering, wire fraud, money laundering, kidnapping, attempted murder, and conspiracy charges that could result in life sentences. As each charge was read, my parents stood defiantly, still playing the victims. My father actually smiled at the cameras while my mother dabbed at dry eyes with a tissue, performing grief for an audience that no longer believed their act. Alba's arraignment was harder to watch. The woman who'd arranged flowers for every major event in our lives now stood in an orange jumpsuit, her hands cuffed in front of her. Unlike my parents, she seemed broken by the reality of what she'd done. When the judge read the charges of money laundering, conspiracy, and participating in kidnapping a minor, Alba openly wept. Her lawyer entered a guilty plea on all counts, hoping cooperation would earn leniency. The weeks that followed were a blur of legal proceedings, victim impact statements, and media attention. Survivors of my parents' schemes came forward in droves, each with stories that added new dimensions to the horror. An elderly couple who'd lost their retirement savings. A young family whose medical fundraiser had been plundered. Former employees who'd been blackmailed into silence. The prosecutor built a case that revealed 23 years of systematic fraud affecting over 100 victims. Aileen and I spent those weeks in protective custody, healing physically and emotionally while helping build the prosecution's case. Her injuries from the flower shop were severe, including broken ribs, a fractured eye socket, and burns from where they'd held hot metal against her skin. But she insisted on testifying, determined that our parents would face justice for everyone they'd hurt. Her detailed evidence, gathered over 5 years of hiding, became the backbone of the federal case. Alan emerged from witness protection to join us, and for the first time in years, the 3 surviving Thompson siblings were together. We spent long nights sharing memories, trying to separate the real moments of love from the manipulations. Had any of it been genuine? Did our parents ever actually love us, or were we always just potential resources to exploit? These questions haunted us as we prepared to face them in court. The trial began 3 months after the arrest, drawing national attention as a shocking case of family betrayal. The prosecutor painted a picture of calculating predators who'd used their children as props in an elaborate performance, never seeing them as anything more than assets to leverage. The evidence was overwhelming, including recorded conversations, financial documents, and testimony from dozens of victims who'd trusted them. My testimony was the hardest thing I'd ever done. Sitting in that witness box, looking at the people who'd given me life but tried to destroy it, I struggled to reconcile the parents I'd loved with the criminals they'd revealed themselves to be. I told the court about the 2 a.m. phone call, the surveillance of my finances, the attempts on my life. But I also talked about birthday parties and bedtime stories, trying to explain how complete their deception had been. My mother tried to catch my eye several times, mouthing "I love you" with tears streaming down her face. But I'd learned to see through her performances. The tears were real, but they were for herself, for the loss of her freedom and comfort, not for the children she'd betrayed. My father simply glared, his mask finally off, revealing the cold calculation that had always been there beneath the paternal facade. Eileen's testimony was even more powerful. She detailed years of abuse and manipulation, including the forced marriage attempt and the physical violence that had driven her into hiding. She showed the jury her scars, both physical and emotional, and explained how her parents had stolen not just money, but years of her life. Her voice never wavered as she described the torture in the flower shop, how they'd been willing to burn her alive for money. But the most damaging testimony came from unexpected sources. Fellow criminals who'd worked with my parents testified in exchange for reduced sentences, revealing the full scope of the operation. We learned about murder for hire plots that had been discussed but not executed, about plans to fake their own deaths and frame their children, about offshore accounts holding millions in stolen funds. Each revelation was another nail in their coffin. Alba's testimony as a cooperating witness provided crucial insider details. She explained the money laundering operations, named other accomplices who were subsequently arrested, and revealed the location of hidden assets. Her breakdown on the stand as she apologized to Amy, Aileen, and me was painful to watch. She'd destroyed her life for a gambling addiction and fear, becoming a monster in the process. Her cooperation earned her a lighter sentence, but she'd spend at least a decade in prison. The defense tried various strategies, including claiming diminished capacity due to gambling addiction, blaming each other for leading the schemes, and even suggesting their children had driven them to desperation by being ungrateful. But the evidence was too overwhelming, the crimes too heinous, and the jury too disgusted by parents who would prey on their own children. After 3 weeks of trial, the jury deliberated for only 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts. As the foreman read guilty 97 times, my parents finally seemed to understand that their game was over. My mother collapsed in her chair while my father maintained his defiance to the end, shouting about ungrateful children and unfair persecution as bailiffs dragged him away. The sentencing hearing a month later was our chance to give victim impact statements. I stood before the court and spoke not just for myself but for Aaron, who couldn't speak for himself. I talked about the brother who died investigating their crimes, possibly murdered for threatening their empire. I asked the judge to ensure they could never hurt another family, never exploit another tragedy, never again use love as a weapon. Aileen spoke about the years stolen from her, the relationships she couldn't form because she couldn't trust, the therapy that might never fully heal what they'd broken. Alan talked about living with destroyed credit and a criminal record he didn't deserve, about PTSD from their threats and manipulation. Even Amy, brave at 17, testified about nightmares that woke her screaming, about flinching when anyone moved too quickly. Extended family members filled the courtroom, each sharing how my parents' crimes had rippled through generations. Trust was shattered, relationships destroyed, family gatherings now impossible because no one knew who else might have been compromised. The family tree they'd been supposed to nurture had been poisoned at the roots, and we were all trying to find ways to grow despite the contamination. The judge, a stern woman who'd overseen many federal cases, seemed personally affected by our stories. When she pronounced sentence, her voice carried unusual emotion. She called my parents a cancer on the institution of family, predators who'd violated the most sacred trusts. She sentenced them each to 45 years in federal prison without possibility of parole, ensuring they'd likely die behind bars. As they were led away in shackles, my mother called out one last manipulation. "I forgive you all for abandoning us. We only wanted to provide for our family." But the courtroom was empty of sympathy. The performance was over, the audience gone, and the curtain had finally fallen on their decades of deception. The Thompson family crime syndicate was officially ended. But even as justice was served, we survivors faced the harder task of rebuilding. The financial restitution ordered by the court would help victims recover some losses, but how do you restore stolen trust? How do you learn to believe in family again when your own parents proved that blood meant nothing? These questions would take years to answer, but at least now we had the chance to try. The months after the trial were the darkest of my life. Without the adrenaline of survival and the focus of seeking justice, I crashed completely. PTSD manifested in nightmares where my mother's 2 a.m. call replayed endlessly, where Aaron warned me about brake lines, where fire consumed everyone I loved. I couldn't answer phones without panic attacks. I couldn't trust anyone who claimed to care about me. The foundation of family that most people take for granted had been revealed as quicksand, and I was drowning. Therapy became my lifeline, though it took 3 therapists before I found Dr. Amara, who specialized in family betrayal trauma. She helped me understand that my parents had essentially run a cult with themselves as leaders, using emotional manipulation, financial control, and isolation to maintain power. Recovering wasn't just about processing events. It was about deprogramming from decades of distorted reality. Every memory had to be re-examined, every relationship re-evaluated. Aileen moved in with me during this time, and we became each other's anchors. We'd wake from nightmares and make tea at 3 a.m., sitting in silence because words weren't necessary. We'd survived the same war and bore similar scars. Slowly, we began building new traditions that belonged only to us, including Sunday farmers market trips, cooking Aaron's favorite meals on his birthday, and movie nights where we banned any films about family. The financial restitution process revealed the full scope of my parents' theft. Forensic accountants found 17 bank accounts for properties purchased with stolen funds and investments totaling $2.3 million. Every asset was liquidated and distributed to victims according to their losses. I received my stolen inheritance from our grandmother and the life insurance payout they'd tried to claim on me, but the money felt tainted. Eventually, I used it to establish the Aaron Thompson Foundation for Family Fraud Victims. 6 months after the trial, I made a decision that surprised everyone. I quit my job at the investment firm. The career I'd built based on trust and fiduciary duty felt hollow when I could no longer trust my own judgment about people. Instead, I returned to school for a degree in victim advocacy, channeling my experience into helping others navigate similar betrayals. My first day of classes, I met David, another student who'd survived family exploitation, though his story involved a cult rather than criminal parents. David understood the complexity of grieving people who were still alive, the guilt of testifying against family, the fear that their poison might be hereditary. Our friendship began over coffee and textbooks, but deepened through late-night conversations about whether we could ever trust enough to have families of our own. He never pushed for more than I could give, respecting the walls I'd built while gently helping me realize not all of them were necessary. Alan found his own path to healing through teaching. Despite the challenges of his damaged credit and the years lost to our parents' schemes, he earned his teaching certificate and began working with at-risk youth. Many of his students came from families torn apart by crime, addiction, or abuse. He understood their anger and mistrust, using his experience to show them that survival was possible, that they could write different endings to their stories. The Aaron Thompson Foundation grew beyond my initial vision. Survivors of family fraud began reaching out from across the country, desperate for resources that understood their unique trauma. We created support groups, legal aid funds, and educational programs about recognizing financial exploitation within families. The first annual conference drew over 200 attendees, each with stories of parents, children, siblings, or extended family who'd chosen money over blood. Amy became our most powerful advocate, using her experience to speak at high schools about recognizing manipulation and abuse, even from people who claim to love you. Her kidnapping had stolen her innocence, but not her strength. She testified before state legislatures, pushing for stronger laws protecting minors from family financial exploitation. Watching her transform trauma into purpose gave me hope that healing was possible. 3 years after the trial, I received a letter from federal prison. My mother's handwriting was shaky as she claimed to have found religion, to finally understand the magnitude of her sins. She begged for forgiveness, for a chance to apologize in person. I stared at that letter for hours, part of me wanting to believe people could change, another part recognizing the familiar manipulation tactics. After discussing it with Dr. Amara, I chose not to respond. Forgiveness, I learned, didn't require renewed contact with those who'd proven themselves unsafe. My father never wrote. Prison records showed he maintained his innocence, ranting to anyone who'd listen about ungrateful children and conspiracy theories. He'd found like-minded inmates and spent his time planning appeals he'd never win. In a way, his continued delusion was easier to handle than my mother's performance of redemption. At least with him, I knew where I stood. 5 years after that 2 a.m. phone call, I married David in a small ceremony attended by chosen family including siblings, fellow survivors, and the therapists who'd helped us heal. Aileen was my maid of honor. Alan walked me down the aisle, and Amy read a poem about building new gardens after wildfire. We'd all learned that family wasn't about blood or obligation, but about who showed up consistently with genuine care, who celebrated your growth rather than exploiting your resources. Our wedding favors were packets of seeds, symbolizing new growth from scorched earth. The note-attached read growth begins when we plant ourselves in soil we trust. It was a lesson we'd all learned the hard way, that sometimes you have to burn down everything you thought you knew to discover what really matters. Trust could be rebuilt, but only with people who proved themselves worthy through actions, not words. The birth of my daughter 2 years later brought unexpected healing and terror in equal measure. Holding her, I finally understood the monstrosity of parents who could look at their children and see only dollar signs. But her existence also proved that cycles could be broken. David and I were building a family based on genuine love, teaching her that trust was earned, that family meant protection, not exploitation, that love never came with a price tag. Today, 8 years after my parents tried to steal $15,000 using my dead brother's name, I run the foundation full-time. We've helped over 1,000 victims of family financial fraud, providing resources that didn't exist when I needed them. Aileen manages our legal aid program, using her business skills for healing rather than hiding. Alan sits on our board, bringing educator perspectives to our prevention programs. Amy, now a law student, interns with us, preparing to become the advocate she needed but didn't have. We gather every year on Aaron's birthday, not to mourn but to celebrate the brother whose death exposed the truth and saved the rest of us. We share stories of the people we've helped, the laws we've changed, the awareness we've raised. His foundation has done more good than our parents did harm, transforming our family legacy from one of betrayal to one of service. It's not the family Aaron grew up with, but it's the one he would have been proud to claim. The scars remain. I still flinch at late-night phone calls. Trust comes slowly and must be constantly renewed. The word family carries complicated emotions that may never fully resolve. But we survived. More than that, we've thrived. We've proven that while DNA might determine biology, it doesn't determine destiny. We chose to be different, to break the cycle, to build something beautiful from the ashes of what our parents burned down. My daughter asks questions now about why she's never met her grandparents. Someday, when she's older, I'll tell her the full story. I'll explain how family isn't about blood but about choice, how love means protecting rather than exploiting, how trust is the most valuable inheritance we can give. I'll teach her to recognize manipulation disguised as affection, to value herself beyond what she can provide to others, to build relationships on mutual respect rather than obligation. The 2 a.m. phone call that shattered my world ultimately led to its rebuilding on stronger foundations. My parents revealed themselves as predators, but in doing so, they freed us from the prison of false family loyalty. We learned that real family doesn't demand $15,000 at 2 in the morning. Real family shows up with genuine support, celebrates your success without calculating how to steal it, and loves you for who you are rather than what you're worth. In the end, that's the greatest tragedy of my parents' crimes. They had 3 children who loved them genuinely, who would have helped if asked honestly, who valued family bonds above money. But their greed blinded them to the real wealth they possessed. They traded priceless relationships for paper currency, betrayed unconditional love for conditional gain. They gained hundreds of thousands of dollars and lost everything that actually mattered. Sometimes, in quiet moments, I wonder if they understand that now, sitting in their cells with decades ahead to contemplate their choices. Do they realize they had what everyone wants, including children who love them and chose money instead? Do they grasp that their real crime wasn't just fraud, but the murder of possibility, the theft of what could have been? These questions have no answers, and perhaps that's fitting. They made their choices, and we've made ours. The Foundation's motto, painted on our office wall, reads, "Family protects, it doesn't prey." Every day, we help survivors understand this distinction, rebuild their lives, and discover that betrayal doesn't have to be the end of their story. It can be the beginning of something stronger, truer, and more beautiful than what was lost. Because while my parents taught me that blood can betray, The chosen family I've built taught me that real love never comes with a ransom demand. The phone rings in our office, another survivor seeking help, and I answer without fear. This is how we heal, not by forgetting the 2 a.m. call that changed everything, but by ensuring others who receive similar calls know they're not alone. My parents may have stolen money, trust, and innocence, but they couldn't steal our ability to rebuild, to love again, to create the family Aaron would have wanted us to be. And that's a wealth they'll never understand from inside their prison cells. Family isn't blood. It's who shows up at 2 a.m. with real help, not demands. It's who celebrates your success without calculating their cut. It's who loves you beyond your bank account. It's the people who choose you repeatedly, consciously, genuinely. That's the family we've built from the ashes of what we lost, and it's worth more than any amount my parents could have stolen. Their betrayal was our liberation, and we've used that freedom to build something they could never understand: that love without price tags, family without exploitation, trust without surveillance. The 2 a.m. phone call that was meant to be my destruction became my resurrection. And for that unexpected gift, I am finally, genuinely grateful. Did this story of family betrayal resonate with your own experiences? Have you ever discovered that someone you trusted was not who they seemed? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and if this story touched you, please like this video and subscribe for more stories of survival and triumph over betrayal. Remember, you're not alone in facing family deception, and there's always hope for building something better from the ashes. Share this with someone who needs to hear that blood doesn't define family, choices do. Thank you for listening, and remember, real family protects, it never preys. ****